Um, yeah, I enjoyed our conversation. I felt the same way. You know, there's a connection. Um, Don C., who's a very close friend of mine, calls that connection Natashnia. When two people connect, it's like a connection between the eyes. And we didn't get to see each other, but I could feel it in your spirit when we were talking. So when you asked for me to come up with a phrase, you know, I thought of this phrase because I think it's kind of the spirit of this whole meeting. You know, what can we pack into the stream of life? So let me give you a little rundown on my take on that, based on my reflections on the 10th and 11th step in doing this. And what I was doing one night was I was on the website of Stepping Stones, and I was reading something on Bill W. And I was reading the nightly review, and I was like, where the hell did he come up with that phrase? The stream of life. Where did he come up with that? So I looked it up and I Googled it, and I saw Rabindra Tagore, it came up, who was he was a poet, Indian poet, British descent, and he won the Nobel Prize in 1913 for I think it was, well, whatever it was, Nobel Prize. And there was a poem he wrote, and it was called The Stream of Life. And I thought, that's really interesting. And then I went on that same website of Stepping Stones, and there was a list, a manifest of all the books that Bill had on his shelf. And guess which one was on his shelf? Tagore. And you know, if you've read anything about Bill and how he liked to steal stuff from other literature, he took a lot from the big book. He took it from varieties of religious experience, the great fact, vicissitudes. There's a lot of language that he used. So I want to read it. This is called The Stream of Life by Rabindra Tagore. The same stream of life that runs through my veins night and day, runs through the world and dances in rhythmic measures. It is the same life that shoots in joy through the dust of the earth in numberless blades of grass and breaks into tumultuous waves of leaves and flowers. It is the same life that is rocketed in the ocean cradle of birth and death, in ebb and in flow. I feel my limbs are made glorious by this touch of this world of life. And my pride is from the life throb of ages, dancing in my blood at this moment. And he gave me some context of what they were asking. So how do we start this thing? This is an 11-step series, and you know, I was brought up that these steps are in order. You know, there's Don says, you know, he said, you fulfill the condition, you get a spiritual cookie. You know, you fulfill the condition in the first step, you get a spiritual cookie. You come to believe. You come to believe, and then there's only one thing to do with it, is make a decision and turn your will and life over to God. When you do that, then the first thing you got to recognize is how you manage and control your life through fear and self-propulsion, which is the inventory process. And then you share that with somebody. And they point out things you can't see because you can't see your own stuff. Then you take that stuff that you recognize and acknowledge, you take it into 6 and 7. Then you come to a place in 8 where you become willing to make amends to them all, keyword all. And I say that simply because there's a great importance in that. And there was for me. And it was kind of like, well, I'm willing to come to AA, but I'm going to drink beer. You know, I wasn't all in. So, and then, you know, you go and make amends. You make reparation for the damage you've done in people's lives. And you have a new insight into what that is. And what happens in the whole process of this thing is something starts to wake up in you or in me that I didn't know was in me. You know, Diane read it. She said, this unsuspected inner resource. You know, like I can tell it to you like this, like in the way the big book talks about it, it says faith's been involved all along, right? It says there was this faith in the ability to think, you know, my God of reason. I had immense faith in this mental narrative, drunk and sober, in AA and out of AA. And that mental narrative, the only thing it could produce was anxiety. So I like to say, thank God I'm not suffering from what's not happening anymore. Because most of the problems I had were in between my ears, behind my eyes, and I was driven by that condition. And I've recognized that condition today as the bondage of self. It is not me, it's not an entity, it's an activity. And so what happened when I started making amends, this awareness that she talked about, this awareness that is the essence of a spiritual experience, this awareness, intuitive thought, sixth sense, vital thing that they talk about in the book, started to wake up. And it's kind of hard to talk about 11 without 10. I mean, you know, so what they said basically when I was reading this was they were saying something very descriptive to me. At this point, it changed from instructive to descriptive. And they said, you've entered the world of the spirit. And this world of the spirit they're talking about is very similar to what Bill said when he was talking to, what's his name? Dowling, when he was talking to Dowling about this experience he had in Winchester Cathedral. He had this revelatory experience in Winchester Cathedral. And at the time, he didn't know what that was. And like the book says, fleeting and soon lost because he got off into the rest of the stuff. But later on, he had that same experience, only a little more powerful, in a hospital. And that experience was, it was an internal revelatory experience where the veil parted, where he was able to see what he had always tried to believe in, but couldn't believe in. So it became a reality. And this is the whole point. This is the whole point. You know, if I live in my head, it's going to produce one thing. It cannot access that higher level of reality. And so we couple it with, you know, what the book says, self-searching, leveling our pride, doing these inventories, doing fifth steps, prayer, meditation, helping other people, going to meetings, interconnecting, having conversations about this. And what happens is, like anything, when you exercise it, it grows. And, so let me just give you an idea of kind of what I'm talking about, the way the book's talking about it. So it said, I never could do this. I had 19 years sobriety, drank. I came in, my first meeting was in 1979. I was sent here by the courts in Texas because they thought I had a drinking problem. And I got sober, I worked the steps, I did all the things you guys said. I got all the things that AA gives us, a wife, a home, a business, all the outside stuff. And all the outside stuff took me away from the inside stuff. And I drank at 19 years. And I couldn't get released. And I'd had one of those revelatory experiences in 1986 where I realized, oh my gosh, for 6 years I was in AA, I couldn't quit drinking. And then all of a sudden I saw that I couldn't quit drinking, like at a really deep level. I kept trying to quit drinking. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize I couldn't. So I had this experience and it released me in 1986. And I was sober 19 years, drank, and I couldn't get released. I was sent to treatment centers. I was put in 5150s. I completely wrecked everything that was built. And couldn't get released, couldn't get released, and then got released. And for lack of a better word, you know, the same thing happened. I think everybody has these revelatory experiences. I just don't think we cultivate them. I think they're part of the human condition. So what happened when I had this other experience, it was like I got plugged into a light socket for 30 days. The obsession was relieved, and something happened that was really unusual. I had an immense clarity to see the problem from the solution. I wasn't looking at the problem from the problem. And, you know, you can believe this or not, I don't have that luxury. I was there. And so what I did was, that was 11 years ago. What I did was, since that time, I've tried to cultivate this experience, just like the book said, but I never heard it. It says what we really have, emphasis on really, is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. Well, what's that? That's this awakened state. And what's the best way to maintain it is to be this spiritual condition. It's like this thing, the way it happened for me was I started reading just the book. And one night I read, when we retire at night, we constructively review our day. I could never do that before. I always destructively reviewed my day. And what was obvious to me this time was the reason I was destructively reviewing my day was because I was seeing it through the lens of guilt and shame, not clarity. So it was always like fault. It was always through that lens of guilt and shame rather than a mistake, which is a normal human condition. So it said we were resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid. Do we owe an apology? So basically, they're asking me questions that I've already gone through, right? Have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person? Were we kind and loving to all? What could we do better? Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time? Or were we thinking what we could do for others or what we could pack into this stream of life? And I was like, whoa, that's really, really similar to what that Tagore was saying when he was describing this poem. But we must be careful. We must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, which is that condition of self. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness. Now, this is the way I saw it. I didn't see it as I asked God to forgive me. That's not what it said. It said, we ask God's forgiveness. Well, my experience with God's forgiveness was the revelatory experience I had that released me. It was like that experience of grace, unconditional love. And what happened out of that experience was the ability to see I was never judged. I was the one doing the judging. And so this is what I'm asking for now. I'm asking for this to be in this place, this present state condition where this is my natural state. I used to think selfishness was my natural state. It's not. I don't buy that. My spiritual malady has to do with the seeming separation of me from that spirit. That seeming separation wasn't a spiritual dilemma. It was a mental narrative that told me I was screwed up spiritually. It's just the way I see it. There's nothing wrong with any of us. And most of us know that there is this connection, this grace, this forgiveness. Most of us know that because That's why I was drinking in the first place. I was trying to connect. See? And this was Jung's way of articulating it. He said, we use this. See, that was my medicine. Boy, you give me a little cold gray goose in a glass. Oh, okay, I can deal with the bills. I can deal with work. I can deal with whatever. That was that synthetic false. So what I realized was that was all I was ever looking for, ever, in whatever way it manifested. So this book took on a different type of meaning. Then it went into, on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours a day. You know, there's like 15 times it mentions thinking or thought in this, right? In just a couple paragraphs. We consider our plans for the day. I said this to Koyas one time. He said, what do you think that means? And he said, I said, well, you know, I write a list of everything I'm going to do today. He goes, that's not what it means. I said, well, what do you mean that's not what it means? He said, your plans for the day, Kurt, are the corrective measures of how you're going to be today, not what you're going to do. When that being is right, then that action that comes out of it's a different action. It's a different way of doing things. It's more intuitive. It's more responsive. It's not reactive. It has more of a flow to it. So I never looked at it like that. I never looked at, oh, this is what they talked about in the fear inventory. It says, you know, we commenced to outgrow fear. Direct my attention to what you'd have me be. So the way the analogy I use with this is this. I say, if you imagined a bucket of water and the bucket of water was super dirty and you stuck your hand in it and your intellect said, you need to clear the water by circling your hand in a clockwise position. And you did that. You pulled your hand out and you realized the water's still dirty. So plan B would be put your hand in and circle it in a counterclockwise position. You pull your hand out, the water's still dirty. Plan C would be put your hand in there and go vertically horizontal. Pull your hand out, the water's still dirty. So if you pause, like they say later in the 11th step, and you ask for an intuitive thought or action, it's like this with that water. All of a sudden you stop putting your hand in the water. You don't do something, you don't do something. And what happens naturally is the water starts to clear. And when the water starts to clear, you can see exactly what was causing the cloudiness in the pail at the bottom of the bucket. This would be a metaphor for that. This is the, see, sometimes I think I was in my own way. You know, James talks about it in Varieties of Religious Experience. He says, sometimes we try to think of a phone number or a person's name, and the harder we try and think, the more we block the ability to get to that phone number or that thought process, that memory that has it. And as soon as we turn away from it, it seems to come forth of its own accord. See, this is all we can do is point at what they're talking about here. We can't talk about this. This is experiential. So I really liked that because it was like we consider our plans. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, asking it to be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, and self-seeking motives. And this is just my take on this. You know, take it or leave it. This is that mental narrative that produces anxiety. We call it fear. It's faith in a thought system of what's not happening. That's what it is. Self-pity is the past. Dishonest is the present. I cannot see with clarity. I see through a lens of self, conditioning, a narrative, trauma, old ideas, belief systems, that. Or self-seeking, which is the future. Under these conditions, I'm asking to be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. So what I'm really asking is what the book says in chapter 5. I'm asking for presence, to be present, to be here. In the book, it says, in the how it works, it says, may you find him now. Not in the past, not in the future, not with a mental narrative overlaying it, but with some clarity here, right now. Under this condition, it says, under this condition, I can employ my mental faculties for assurance. For after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a higher plane. That's what I'm talking about. This awareness is the essence of a spiritual experience, or more religious members call it God consciousness. Vital sixth sense. This is what we're talking about. Mental faculties, right? Language, creativity. I mean, there's a number of them. I mean, you have to just kind of fiddle through and see what you got. Our thought life will be placed on a higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. I don't like the word wrong because it's a dualistic word that, really gets, it's like kind of off track, right? In thinking about our day, we may face indecision. It doesn't say about going into the day, it says about thinking, indecision. We ask God for an inspiration into a thought. We relax, we take it easy. See, my problem was I couldn't relax because I had this narrative running all the time in my head. And I thought the narrative was me. It is not. We don't struggle. We're often surprised how the right answers come after we've tried this for a while. What used to be a hunter occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Being still inexperienced, having just made contact. It says you might pay this presumption, you will pay this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions, right? I mean, we conclude the period of meditation. So the meditation, there's lots of meditations. There's, there's so many modalities. There's so many different ways of meditating. And all those meditations are to bring you to a meditative state. The meditative state, I think, is conscious awareness. It is presence. It's a state of well-being. And that everybody works that in their own way. There's, people, in the last 6 months, I've heard a lot about two-way prayer. I have no experience with it. There's contemplative meditations, there's centering prayer, there's vipassana, there's all kinds. I like what Bill said. He didn't say anything about it. He said, everybody finds their own thing. My thing is to go sit at the beach. I go down to the beach, I sit on a wall. It's not very attractive. It doesn't sound very deep and spiritual, but it works for me. I look at the ocean. I listen to the Mother Nature. I come in my office. I like to read books. I like to listen to spiritual people who are talking from that language of the heart. And I have an ear for that because I've developed it. It's not a narrative that's based in fear and self-propulsion. And so there's another part that talks about, how much time do we have, Ollie?
Another 10, 15 minutes.
Okay. This was an exercise I got from Don. He said, well, a couple of them. He said, look, for a week, you you can't ask why. I was like, well, why? And he said, you have to, every time you want to ask why, you have to ask next. What's the next indicated step? Not the why. And that was 11-step exercise. I never saw it in the book, but then I saw it in the book after I did it. And then another thing he had me do was he said, I want you to pause when agitated or doubtful. I want you to do that for a week. And of course, I did what he said, and I came back to him a week later. I said, totally failed the exercise. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, I failed the exercise. He said, what are you talking about? I said, you told me to pause. I said, I paused. During the week, I didn't get a thing done because I was busy pausing all the time, because every time I was agitated or doubtful, I paused. And he goes, you dummy, that's not why I asked you to do it. He goes, what I was trying to get you to see is every time you get agitated or doubtful, you're moving into this condition, this condition of self. And he said, when you pause, you interrupt that energy. He said, it's like a street that's got curbs on it. He said, you're driving down the middle of the street. When you bump the curb, you make an adjustment, a corrective measure to get back in the street. I was like, okay, I got it. It's not a fault-based thing. See, I was processing it through failure, success, guilt, shame, duality. It's like, this is the way it is. So the other story that he gave me, well, he didn't give it to me, I stole it, was a story he told about Johnny Looking Cloud when he was having some trouble at 4 or 5 years sober. And he went up to Johnny Looking Cloud, and Johnny Looking Cloud took him outside because he was having trouble with 6 and 7. And he took him outside. He took a cane that he used, and he drew this line in the sand out in front of his house. And he told Koyas to get on this line. And he said, I want you to walk that line. And as Don started walking on the line, Johnny Looking Cloud came around to the right side of him and pushed him off the line. And Koyas said, what did you do that for? He said, just get back on the line. So he got back on the line, he started walking a little more, and Johnny Looking Cloud came around to the left and pushed him off to the left. And he said, by the time I got to the end of the line, I was really pissed off because this guy had pushed me off the line like 5 or 6 times and didn't tell me why. He said, and then Johnny Looking Cloud said something to him. He said, I want you to turn around and look at the line. And he turned around and he looked, he said, Johnny Looking Cloud said to Don, you think the path is that line. It's not. The path, he put his hands out like this, he said, is that line and the steps off of it, back onto it, off of it, back onto it. And it clicked for me. I said, oh, constructively review my day. This is how I'm going to build by seeing my mistakes. And they are simply mistakes. There's no guilt or shame attached to them. And if there is, there's probably an amends that needs to be made somewhere back wherever. That's an indicator. It's like that guilt's supposed to be there. I did wrong, guilt. I am wrong, shame. That's a delusion. That narrative is coming from the condition of self, a belief system. It's not true. So this was how he kind of shaped the way I understood this nightly, morning kind of exercise, right? As we go through the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful. We ask for the right thought or action. We constantly remind ourselves we are no longer running the show. You know, a friend of mine said this the other day. He said, you know, the whole point of this is, in the third step, is being convinced, right? Like if you want to pray for something, pray for being convinced. He said, and then at some point, it has to grow into staying convinced. Like not going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So how we do that, or how I do that, is on a daily basis. What I really have is that. So it says, running the show, humbly saying to ourselves many times this day, thy will be done. At some point for me, that changed, because it sounded like thy will be done needs to happen. What changed about it was thy will is being done. It's happening. This, whatever you want to call it, in my eyes and understanding, we are all an expression of this will. In a traditional way, they'd say the four-legged, the two-legged, the winged ones, the fish, everything is a manifestation of that will. We're all relatives. There's no exclusivity, it's inclusivity. We're all brothers and sisters. The Sweat Lodge, they say the Stone Brothers. They welcome the Stone Brothers into the Sweat Lodge. I used to wonder, what the hell are they talking about? They recognize this is an expression of that will. There's a lot of different modalities of the way this is expressed in because it says, be quick to see where religious people are right, not that they're right. Be quick to see where. And at this point, some discernment starts to be obvious, because you're not seeing with your head, you're seeing with this other sense. And I mean, this is a tremendous realization. It's a tremendous gift. It's a tremendous thing for me to be a part of all you guys talking about this. And this is what I think is really what happens. This is the theme. What can we pack into the stream of life? It ain't out there. It's in here. It's like, this is what I think it's about. So I think with that, I think all the air is out of the balloon here. I think I'll leave it there.